Good afternoon from Brussels, and good morning if you're joining us from across the Atlantic. I'm Ian Lesser from GMF here in Brussels, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you to this discussion today on Turkey-Russia relations between competition and cooperation. Thanks so much for joining us. We have a very good crowd and a very good group of people to join our conversation today, but I'll let our moderator introduce them in a moment. But if you'll allow me just to say a few words on behalf of GMF. First of all, for those who know us well, you'll know our mission is very simply, as you see behind me here, strengthening transatlantic cooperation. But really, for many years, we have seen the relationship with Turkey as integral to that. We have an office in Ankara. We have a very, very active program here in Brussels run by my colleague Kadri Taştan, a senior fellow, a very active program that he leads that is sponsored by the Union of Chambers and Commodity Exchanges of Turkey, TOBB, and Kadri is the TOBB fellow here. And let me also thank them very much for their support of this conversation and the entire series, the program, in fact. We're very active through our office. We're very active in Brussels and in Washington and elsewhere. We take this very seriously for many reasons that I don't need to explain to all of you. We've continued to think it very important to have a presence in Turkey, and also our Black Sea Trust. And I'm very glad one of my colleagues, Alina Naya from the Black Sea Trust, is here with us today. Our Black Sea Trust operates in Turkey as well. And so we have multiple sort of GMF points of engagement with Turkey. But, you know, as we all know, in recent years, there have been many difficult issues, especially in terms of Turkey's relations with transatlantic partners. We're going to get to talk about some of those today because not all of them concern Turkey's geopolitics or Turkey's relations with Russia, but some number of them do. And those relations are not simple or straightforward. And I think in our title, you see between competition and cooperation, a sense of the complexity of the relationship. But also, I guess we'll get to talk about the implications for transatlantic partnership, which are also very, very important. Again, we have a wonderful group of friends to join us today. I'm going to turn it over now to Kadri to introduce them and also to moderate our discussion. So thank you again for joining us and look forward to the conversation. Kadri, over to you.
Thank you, Ian. Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning if you are in the United States. And thank you very much for joining us today. We are really glad to have a substantial number of people with us today, despite the online discussion fatigue, kind of. My name is Kadri Taştan. I'm senior fellow with the GMF here in Brussels, and I'm really pleased to moderate this discussion. Well, today we will discuss another important topic, Russia-Turkey relations, with my distinguished guests. I will introduce them a bit later, of course. Indeed, the cooperation, competition, compartmentalization, personalization, institutionalizations, all these words are used to define the Russian-Turkey relations today. But the year 2016 was the beginning of a process of rapprochement between the two countries. And then we see the sequence of several developments in Turkish-Russian relations, such as Turkey's acquisition of S-400 air defense system, the construction of a second Russian gas pipeline across the pipeline to Turkey, the contracting of first Turkish nuclear power plant with a Russian company, Russia's facilitation of Turkish incursion into area of northern Syria previously controlled by the YPG, and the Astana process between Turkey, Russia, and Iran to deal with the situation in Idlib. But even though the two countries have conflicting interests in the Balkans, the Black Sea, the Caucasus, the Middle East, they have been able to accommodate each other in most of these areas and find avenues for cooperation. So during this rapprochement process, Turkey and Russia found themselves generally on opposite side of the conflict in Syria, in Libya, and in Nagorno-Karabakh recently. However, they have been able to keep their relationship intact. Indeed, even if Turkey's discontent with the West, maybe coupled with the political changes in the country and systemic changes in the Middle East, helps to explain the formation of closer relations between the two actors in mid-2016. However, the personal relations between the two leaders has been crucial in keeping these relations on track in the face of numerous crises and challenges since then. In fact, given the weakness of institutional agency in this relationship, the personal relations between the two presidents become even more important factor in this relationship. Maybe perhaps another important aspect of this relationship that is needed to be mentioned is the asymmetry in favor of Moscow, which constitute a major problem for Turkey in its relation with Russia. So not surprisingly, this Russia-Turkey rapprochement, if we can call it like that, is causing great concern among Turkey's NATO allies, and therefore understanding the nature of this relationship, analyzing it have become a challenge for observer and analysts. So to help you better understand the nature of Turkey-Russia relationship in a long-term perspective, we have put together a really great panel for you today. So we have Ambassador Tajan İldem, who is a former Assistant Secretary General for Public Diplomacy at NATO. And he's also newly chairman of EDAM, Istanbul-based think tank. Thank you, Ambassador İldem, for joining. Then we have Alissa de Carbonell. Alissa is Deputy Program Director of Europe and Central Asia at the International Crisis Group. Thank you so much, Alissa, for joining. And our third speaker is my colleague, Alina. Alina is Director of Black Sea Trust for Regional Cooperation at GMF in Bucharest, in Romania. So thank you so much for joining. So first of all, I will give the floor to our three speakers to have their introductory remarks. Then, of course, I will ask them some question and have a really short conversation with them, because we have a lot of participants. I want to keep more time with the Q&A session. So we will open up, of course, to all of you. And just to say this, this is on the record. And if you would like to put a question, there's a Q&A function at the bottom of Zoom window, and we will keep track of them, and we will get as many of you as we can. Please specify also who you are asking your question. With that, Ambassador İldem, I would like to start with you. So you have 5 to 7 minutes for your introductory remark. Over to you, please. Thank you.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for the invitation. Good morning to our American friends, and good afternoon to all of you. It's a pleasure to be here talking about an important issue, Turkey-Russia relations. Russia is an undeniably significant player in the region that Turkey is located, and also an important neighbor of Turkey. There is a long history of wars between the Ottoman and Russian empires, and the Cold War rivalry between the West and the Soviet Union. That's why the current relationship and elevated cooperation in recent years between Turkey and Russia may come to many, especially those in the West, as a surprise. There are a number of analyses as to the drivers of the relationship between the two countries. For some, the interests of both in the field of energy resources were a determining factor. For others, this affection shown to both countries from the West was the real incentive for them to seek ways to promote cooperation between them. And some also argue, like you did, that the personal chemistry between the two incumbent presidents has helped the current spirit that exists between the two capitals to strive for new avenues of cooperation. Of course, when we look at these assumptions, they may be true to a certain extent. Nevertheless, they may not be perceived as a real driver for the existing cooperation between Turkey and Russia. When we look at the historical development of relations between the two countries, we recognize the fact that it was the Soviet Union first to recognize Turkish Grand National Assembly government in 1921. It was the first recognition, which was not followed by others. Later on in 1925, they were able to sign a friendship and non-aggression treaty, which was a strong pillar foundation for the relations thereafter. We also remember the Stalin territorial claims, and perhaps one may conclude that Turkey was not given any other choice but to join the Western club. Although I must say that following the vision of Grand Atatürk, it was a deliberate choice to stand next to Western democracies rather than being among autocratic regimes. In spite of the then Turkish government's strategic decision to take part in the Western institutions, Turkish-Russian relations were conducted in a spirit of mutual respect and cooperation. It is a fact that Russia was active in its investments in Turkey, building steel and aluminum factories and oil refinery. So it is no surprise that the relations expanded in the economic front. Although Turkish-Russian relations can be seen complicated at first glance, there is a meaningful pattern of behavior between the two going for decades. The bilateral relations are driven by a careful compartmentalization of strategic interests and divergences. You refer to it as well. This very dichotomy manifests itself across a broad agenda, ranging from Libya, Syria, Nagorno-Karabakh, to illegal and illegitimate annexation of Crimea by Russia and its destabilization policies in the Donbas region in Ukraine, and Turkey's acquisition of S-400 missile defense systems. Some may argue that compartmentalization as a defining feature is just a myth, given the fact that the shooting down of the Russian fighter jet and Moscow's reaction to this incident show that it was not quite straightforward. For those who make this argument, there is an underlying features. One is recognition of interests and also common vision for the future. I may agree with that, but still tend to stick to the notion of compartmentalization while making assessments about the relationship between Turkey and Russia. The notion of compartmentalization that exists between Ankara and Moscow is in essence based on transactionalism. A degree of asymmetry, and you refer to that, is inherent in this transactionism, unfortunately to the advantage of Russia. One can claim that Russia has been implementing a coherent and consistent, for its own sake, foreign and security policy since Putin's Munich Security Conference speech of 2007, the development and implementation of Gerasimov Doctrine, and all strategic policy documents being revised since 2014. We see selective and limited cooperation between the two countries where the stars are aligned, alongside competitive cooperation where the strategic interests still remain at odds at macro level. So the title cooperation and competition could be merged, and I may qualify the relationship to be a competitive cooperation. The competitive cooperation pattern at times has been breached by political, military, systemic anomalies, such as the downing of a Russian fighter bomber in 2015, or the killing of 36 Turkish troops in Idlib by Russian and Syrian joint operations in 2020. Although such incidents have the potential to strain relations from time to time, Turkey and Russia managed to demonstrate impressive comebacks. Apart from the compartmentalization feature, I think the ability for these countries to restore relations following serious setbacks remain yet another strength in the bilateral ties. I may also give one important highlight in the relationship of the two countries, because Russia reacted to the failed coup attempt in Turkey in 2016, demonstrating its understanding of the situation and solidarity with the elected government in Turkey. And this differentiated Russia from Turkey's Western allies, with a few exceptions. That's why, for instance, President Erdoğan paid his first foreign visit to Moscow in the aftermath of this coup attempt, hinting at the special anchor in the Turkish-Russian relations. You refer to Turkey and Russia enjoying intensive economic relations. It is true, and the energy component of it is quite predominant. Russia is a hydrocarbon dependent economy, and Turkey is a major client of Russian natural gas. 55% of Turkey's natural gas used to come from Russia. Now the percentage is about 34%. Although Turkey's reliance on Russia's supplies decreased after TANAP pipeline became operational, Russian natural gas still accounts for an important share of Turkey's imports. Now, few words on the regional questions. I must say that Turkey often finds Russia as the only or the most significant actor in conflicts around her. In a sense, Russia became a neighbor not only over the Black Sea, but in the south as well. This is valid for NATO as well. That's why in our report, NATO 2030, United for a New Era, which was submitted by an independent experts group commissioned by the NATO Secretary General, and I had the honor to take part in that group. We also highlighted the importance of having a 360-degree approach, focusing on the South, not only threats and challenges coming from the East. Insofar as Turkey's role within NATO is concerned, I must say that other allies are cognizant of Turkey's contributions to collective defense, ongoing operations and missions. And let us not forget that since 2014, after the illegal annexation of Crimea by Russia, a number of decisions were taken for the military adaptation of NATO with a view to strengthening the deterrence and defense of the alliance. These decisions and all measures were put into place with the support and contributions of Turkey. So this is also a reality that we need to establish at the outset. Any question mark whether Turkey is shifting its axis or not is something that need to be evaluated against the backdrop of NATO's contributions to Turkish security, but also Turkey's invaluable support and contributions to collective defense operations and missions of NATO. And I'm sure that in the question and answer period, we may have time to dwell upon how allies perceive Turkey in this relationship, in its relationship with Russia and partners in the region, and how Turkey deals with some of the key questions pertaining to the region. So I stop here, since you said it should be for 5 minutes.
No, this is great. Thank you so much, Ambassador Iltem, for this complete picture. And I'm sure Alisa and Alina will also comment on that and how it's perceived from the Turkish partner from the West. Maybe we can continue with you, Alisa. So over to you.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be here for the discussion, and I think many of my comments will echo the ambassador, so it's great to have also that historical perspective that he brought. So we've already heard a bunch of terms and a new one, competitive cooperation, for describing the relationship. I'll bring another, frenemies. Very American of me to say, but I think all of these terms sort of encapsulate the contradictions that puzzle many about the relationship. I sometimes hear concerns in my conversations with Western diplomats about Russia and Turkey being in cahoots, and I hear it both as an argument in favor of a tougher stance against the one or the other, or an argument in favor of not pushing them further into each other's embrace by doing so, by taking a tougher stance. So given that the analysis reads as many things to very different conclusions, I think both of these views seem to be missing something. And so I'm glad we can get into some of the issues in the discussion. I mean, one of them is to understand, you know, how durable the relationship is, and also what are the risks if it goes sour, and how much is it really influenced by their respective positioning vis-a-vis the West, or rather in opposition to it. So we've heard, and I agree, that the relationship is transactional, that both Moscow and Ankara have found ways to manage their many differences and cooperate even as they back warring parties in Syria and Libya, in the South Caucasus. I'd also argue that the relationship has grown more robust in recent years in spite of these multiplying potential flashpoints, in part as both reach for greater regional sway. So I think, you know, we already, the ambassador touched on this. I think the contradictions of the Ankara-Moscow relationship are perhaps clearest in Syria, where, of course, Turkey was among Assad's fiercest opponents, and Russia instead threw its weight behind him, you know, in particular worried about extremism and what it views as Western-backed regime change. And the 2015 crisis is often mentioned as an example of how sturdy their ties are, that they were able to overcome it. I just wanted to also point out maybe that, you know, it showed how fragile relations were, at least at that point in time. I mean, the chill lasted, the chill that followed that incident lasted over half a year. And it also showed up the asymmetry of the trade ties, which was already mentioned. I mean, Russian sanctions on Turkish imports, the ban on charter tours for tourists to go to Turkey, other restrictions in response to what Putin, you know, dubbed I think a backstabbing at that point, was really quite painful for Turkey. And I think those economic issues are still very important today. We're seeing the implosion of the lira in the last couple of days. So I think, you know, the rapprochement in the wake of the 2016 failed coup led to much stronger relations than either could contend to have had before. And part of this thaw was driven, I think, by Ankara's anger over Washington's support for the Syrian Kurds and a perceived need to contain the YPG, which superseded maybe a desire to oust Assad before that. And of course, as the ambassador mentioned, Putin's reaction and being the first foreign leader to really reach out to Erdoğan after the coup. So, all of the thaw sort of jump-started the lagging Turk Stream pipeline at the time. It brought also the now infamous S-400 missile deal, but it also brought the inception of sort of new diplomatic modes for crisis prevention between the two. So when the next crisis came, which was also mentioned, the Russian-linked airstrikes that I think were the deadliest day for Turkish forces in decades, in February 2020, it was dealt with in a very different way. I mean, it's left a bitter feeling in Ankara, but days later there was a ceasefire deal, and then the Astana process eventually, and that truce, as Kadri mentioned, has been important for Turkey's own interventions in Syria. And I think in Libya and Nagorno-Karabakh too, we see Russia and Turkey not only enmeshed on competing sides of the conflict, but in the diplomacy to end them. So the two have taken this very pragmatic approach, and for the most part, skirting each other's red lines, and accepting to share a sphere of influence in these areas. And their aims, I think it's important to mention, their aims in these conflicts aren't necessarily the same as allies on the ground, and they're not necessarily mutually exclusive. And one of them, which I'm sure we will discuss more today, is the difficult relations that both Moscow and Ankara have respectively with Western capitals at the moment. And of course, the S-400 purchase and deal flying the face of sanctions by Washington perhaps best encapsulates how they see each other as useful to balancing against the US and pushing for a bigger stake of what they would like to see as a multipolar world. That's not to say areas of tension don't still exist, and they do present a risk of exacerbating conflicts in which they're both entangled, were relations to go sour. There are a number of examples. I mean, Russia's anger over the involvement of Syrian mercenaries in the fighting alongside Azerbaijan's forces in last year's war over Nagorno-Karabakh, or the use of Turkish drones by Ukrainian forces. I mean, tensions in northern Syria, I think, remain high, and there's potential for conflict or tensions also outside of these conflict theaters over negotiations over long-term gas contracts, which I think are expiring at the end of the year. So just to conclude, but even if they disagree in these many areas on many battlefields, I think each at the moment places a greater value on the potential gains from their cooperation, whether in trade for Turkey or against US hegemony for Russia, or their joint desire for greater say in foreign affairs. I think that calculus is unlikely to shift for either of them in the short term. So I think perhaps we'll discuss all of that more.
Thank you, Alisa. Thank you so much for this. Well, Alina, over to you. And just before, I would like to do an announcement, because to the audience for the Q&A session. Please put your question on the through the Q&A function that I'm sure you are now used to use it. Sorry, Alina, go ahead. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Kadri. It's very difficult to be the third speaker after two very knowledgeable speakers and not repeat everything that was said before. So I'll try to do this and offer Alisa yet another term that I have come across, which is conflictual cooperation. Because as you mentioned, there are very many areas, be them geographical or domain-wise, where the two countries conflict, yet they continue to cooperate. So here's a new term for you to use it if you want. I didn't invent it, unfortunately. And also, Kadri, and maybe even Ambassador Tachan Ildem, I would like to somewhat contradict you and say that I don't believe that the trust, or the relation rather, between the two leaders between Putin and Erdoğan is the most important element of this relation. I think it's only secondary, and the most important element in this relation are rather mutual objectives and somewhat mutual vital interests. It is a transactional relation. It's not a strategic alliance. It's not based on love. It's based on shared objectives here and there. And I think that's what really makes it very strong, and that's what really makes it very powerful. And the relation, as everybody has noticed so far, has really grown in the past because of these joint objectives. Also, it depends on current priorities. And somehow the two leaders and those who are driving the relation have managed to focus on current priorities and leave the past rivalries in the past, and don't let this drive the relation, which I think it's very mature for a relation between two countries. Again, as I said, and I repeat this, it's not based on love. It's rather based on the very cold, mature conclusion that collaboration brings greater advantages than a continued conflict, hence the collaboration wherever possible. One element which Alisa mentioned and the ambassador also mentioned is both of the countries have very complicated, to say the least, relations with the West, with Western capitals. And this is another factor that drives at least Turkey into this alliance with Russia, because Turkey needs this relation with Russia in order to enhance its power of negotiation with the Western capitals, as much as it needs the relation with the Western capitals in order to be able to negotiate with Russia and to reduce a little bit of the asymmetry that Kadri mentioned at the beginning. So I think Turkey uses this much better than Russia does, the complicated relation with the Western capitals, to its advantage, and it uses the fact that it is a loyal member of NATO once again to be able to come to the same level with Russia in this relation. As Alisa mentioned, the relation progressed quite substantially, I would say, because over the past years we have seen it, at least in the not only in the economic field, but here as well, progressing from cooperation in trade, from trade relations to fields which are more strategic, nuclear power, energy, military armament, the missiles. So this has really shown that even if there are conflicting interests here and there, the relation does grow more strategic and does grow more sound, as I said. The countries in the region, how do the countries in the Black Sea region in eastern part of Europe see this relation? Well, initially in 2016 and in the next in the following 2 or 3 years, they have seen this relation, or they have looked rather at this relation very, very alarmed and fearing that Russia and Turkey would grow together as allies in the Black Sea, and they would do harm together. They would harm the other countries together, to put it this way. So many of them feared this relation, yet with years, and as the experience showed and the events showed, they understood the nature of this relation. They understood the conflictual nature of this cooperation, if you want. And the fear has subsided, and they were able to use the tension, if you want, in this relation to their advantage. I'm talking about Ukraine, who is using drones from Turkey, and Russia. Maybe they're upset about this, but they don't make too much noise about this. So there's some sort of mutual acknowledgement of the situation. I'm talking about Moldova, who uses who benefits, if you want, of Turkey's cooperation in Gagauzia, and they are able to somewhat use again this relation to their advantage. I'm also talking about Romania, who has a very good relation with Turkey, has a very good level of trade with Turkey, yet a horrible relation with Russia, as you probably know. So countries in the region have managed to use the nature of this relation to their advantage and not fear it any longer. And I would also like to mention, because I think it's important, the way that Russia and Turkey handled the conflict in Nagorno-Karabakh. Yes, there were conflicting interests at times, yet they were on opposing sides at times. Yet they seem to be the victors of this conflict at the end of the day. So even here, they were able to overcome their diverging interests and follow their objectives. So to conclude, I would say that we shouldn't fear this relation as much as we used to. We shouldn't take this relation for granted as something that it's going to last forever, whatever happens. Yet we should understand that it's a solid and stable relation. And one of the questions that Kadri you were asking in your email to us was what would happen if there would be any political change. Well, in Turkey, I presume, because in Russia it's a little bit more difficult to believe it's going to happen anytime soon. Given the solidity and the depth of this relation, I don't think a political change in Turkey would necessarily change this relation too much. I think it would continue, and Putin would find a way to build trust with a different political leader if it will come to this.
Thank you so much, Alina. I can see that in the Q&A also there is a question about this political change, how it can affect, but we can maybe come back to this question. But Ambassador İldem, I would like to also ask you a question about the S-400 issues, about the purchase of S-400 missile, and attend Turkey as a NATO member country of course, this has a really strong meaning for the relations, not only between Turkey and Russia, but also between Turkey and United States and other Western allies. And how this issue will be resolved will also show us, maybe, I don't know if I'm exaggerating, the kind of the direction of these relations. How do you see this issue, and what are your expectations? This is the first question. Maybe a second one, you know that recently there was the 8th summit of Turkic Council was organized in Istanbul 2 weeks ago, precisely. So can be perceived as an important step toward the institutionalization of the cooperation between Turkish states. With this meeting, even the name of council was changed to Organization of Turkic States. What do you think about this? I mean, do you think it's an important step, and how would Russia will look at on this, and how it can potentially affect the Turkish-Russian relations? Over to you.
Well, first of all, if I may react to some of the points raised during the introductory remarks of the distinguished panelists. First of all, I also refer to the chemistry match between the two incumbent presidents as not a defining feature, but something that comes from time to time as an argument for determining the drivers of the relationship between the two countries. So I'm in agreement with Alina that it is not a defining feature. My second point would be whether a political change in Turkey could influence the nature of relations between the two countries. Of course, there may be certain changes to different practices in foreign policy and security policy issues, but the trust of the relationship between Turkey and Russia is something which is determined by the geography and the dynamics of the regional issues. And no matter what party politics would be, still relations with Russia will continue to be an important one, since Russia is next door neighbor, an important global player, and is also a player in regional conflicts surrounding Turkey. Even when there are disagreements about the final objectives in different geographical terrains, like in Syria, forcing Russia to seek attainable goals rather than leaving the field free for it to pursue maximalist gains without resistance would not be something any given government would follow as a policy. So therefore, we need to see that there would be a necessity to engage Russia in a reasonable manner. Now, regarding to your question on S-400s, for allies, Turkey's acquisition of S-400s was a major issue that triggered questions regarding Turkey's loyalty to NATO and created somewhat wrong perceptions as a shift of axis by Turkey. During the discussion of this issue, our allies, raised the decisions of NATO leaders included in 2016 and 2018 summit communiques, by which leaders pledged to work to address the existing dependencies on Russian sourced legacy military equipment through national efforts and multinational cooperation. We know that there are certain Russian systems part of their national inventories of their armed forces. And it is essential to gradually eliminate these weaponry from their arsenals. This question also came during our deliberations as NATO independent experts group, while we were trying to contribute to Secretary General's work in projecting a NATO vision for 2030 and beyond. And I must say that Turkey was not mentioned as such in our report, but one important finding has been incorporated in that report. In the emerging and disruptive technologies section, we emphasize the need for allies to invest more in military technology transfer and cooperation, so that individual allies denied from such technologies would not go out of NATO sources to procure some of the requirements that they feel for their national security and for their contribution to NATO efforts. And I think it would be important when the leaders discuss and adopt the strategic concept in June of next year at their summit meeting, also to address this issue. I mean, take for instance, the United States cooperating with Australia within the framework of AUKUS, which was signed recently, on delivery of technology for nuclear-powered submarines. And we are talking about NATO allies. Australia is a strong partner, but not a NATO ally. Therefore, countries like the United States should be able to address this issue while talking about the need to have interoperability of forces within the alliance. When we talk about technological edge to be maintained in competing with strategic rivals, especially at a time when systemic competition would be felt more and more in international relations. So cooperation in technology transfer would be crucial thing for allies to address, especially for those who possess these key technologies. And regarding S-400s, of course, it relates to Turkey-United States relations. I must say that the United States should engage with Turkey in a genuine and purposeful dialogue. Right now, different exchange of views are taking place in different platforms, ministries of defense and so on. But a genuine dialogue is needed to resolve this S-400 issue, because I cannot comprehend a situation in which one ally imposes sanctions to another, especially at a time when we talk about systemic strategic competition. And I'm sure that it would be Russia and China who would be pleased with the implementation of sanctions by one ally to another. The immediate issue is right now for the United States and Turkey to agree on a solution. Perhaps S-400s that Turkey procured from Russia would not be used, and this would be verified by NATO. And at the same time, Turkey should be back to F-35 program, and it should not be denied from procuring F-35s that it already ordered and also paid the amount, some of the amount required. So this is one important issue to tackle. Regarding the perceptions of partner countries, I think initially they might have got alarmed by the rapprochement between Turkey and Russia, especially those countries like Georgia and Ukraine. But we all have seen what Turkey has been doing in support of these countries in development of their defense capacity. You referred to, this previous speakers referred to export of drones, armed drones to Ukraine. But there are also other spheres of cooperation in the defense industry sector with Ukraine. Therefore, Turkey not only supports both countries' defense capacity building efforts, but at the same time politically is a very vocal member country, allied country, expressing its non-recognition policy that Crimea is part of Ukraine. And we should also remember the fact that in Crimea, there are Crimean Tatars. Turks have cultural and historical ties with. And the repression that Crimean Tatars are suffering from is something Turkish public opinion is extremely sensitive about. Now, for the Turkic republics, and now we call them Turkish states, it is an important step. And when we talk about the limitations of Turkey-Russia rapprochement, I'm sure that Russia will always remember the fact that Turkey has strong ties with Turkish states in Central Asia, in the Caucasus, but also Russia will be sensitive with the existence of Turkish communities and Muslim communities within the Russian Federation. And I'm sure that Russia would be keeping an eye on what Turkey would be pursuing as a policy in reaching out to these countries, but also engaging with individual communities within Russia. We know examples of the past, like Chechnya, but there are also sensitive issues for Turkey, like support to terrorist organizations, and it is valid both for Russia and for the United States. PYD-YPG came in our discussion, surfaced in our discussion. It is a very sensitive issue for the public opinion in Turkey. No matter which party affiliation they have, people do not quite understand, and they don't accept an allied country, the United States, to give support to YPG PYD, which is an extension of PKK, and it was recognized as such by past administrations. And we recall the congressional hearings where then Defense Secretary testified to the fact that PYD-YPG has organic links with PKK, and PKK is recognized as a terrorist organization by the United States. Therefore, in dealing with these sensitive issues, especially allies should be able to show understanding and sympathy to the expectations of the Turkish public opinion, because even the governments change, this sentiment will remain. And the Turkish public opinion is quite strong on this issue.
Thank you, Ambassador İldem. Thank you so much. Alisa, I want to continue with you. I would like to have your analysis of the Russian perception of Turkey-Ukrainian relations. Maybe it seems that the Ukrainian crisis can degenerate further. There are signs of escalation, actually. How could this potentially affect the relations between Ankara and Moscow? Alina, it would be also for you, actually. I see that there are also questions for audience. They are linked to this one from Aaron Stein. He's asking a forecast, actually. How do you foresee Ankara managing a large-scale Russian offensive in Ukraine? Will it tilt toward Kiev or toward Moscow, or encourage a robust Western response? Another question, again, linked to this issue. Rafin Zamfir asks his question is how the new Russian military buildup at the border of Ukraine and in the vicinity of the Black Sea is going to affect Russia-Turkey relations, so please, over to you.
To me, right? No, yes. Sorry, I didn't know you were speaking to Alina as well. I'm sure she will follow up with some smart comments. Yeah, I think there are a couple of points maybe to make. Some echo the comments that were already made on this call about the way that Russia and Turkey manage their relationship despite being on opposite sides. A lot of that, I would add, is about balancing against each other. So, there is a certain amount of getting bargaining chips, each, especially I think, sometimes given the asymmetry of that relationship, in order to be able to dialogue and come up with these diplomatic methods of handling their various disagreements. So the ambassador mentioned Turkey's support to a certain extent for Ukraine. I mean, I think it's relatively, Alina can maybe say a bit more about this, but I think it's relatively limited to some defense contracts at the moment. I don't know how deep that relationship goes and whether it's enough to prompt Ankara to rethink its ties with Moscow in light of that. I mean, I think it's the relationship with NATO that is most complicated when it comes to those affairs. And I think, you know, that's one of the membership in NATO is one of the limits on their relationship. To Ankara, it's important to balance against Moscow. It's important as a security umbrella, but, you know, they will never have a strategic alliance, Russia and Turkey in the same way because of Turkey's membership in NATO and all that implies. Maybe also just a comment following from Turkey's relationship in NATO at points when the relationship has, so when we saw these various crises, Turkey, I think, has been more open to NATO's engagement in the Black Sea, which is an area that's really sensitive to Moscow. So that's another element that might play if we see, you know, more of an escalation now in Ukraine. I think those are the most sort of salient points, but I'm sure Alina has some other comments.
Thank you. Thank you, Alisa. Alina, you can answer the questions that I have asked Alisa, and they were also coming from the audience. But I want to add another question for you. What is the European interest when it comes to Russia, and how does the Turkey's relationship with Russia impact European interests? I would like to have your comment on that, and you can also bring even regional perspective on that. Go ahead.
Okay, first of all, let me say something about Ukraine and about Turkey and Russia relation vis-a-vis Ukraine. I might be against the general opinion here, but I don't think there's going to be a more violent conflict in Ukraine. I think what's going on, what's happening now, it's going to continue for some time, unfortunately, but I do not see a major conflagration in and or around Ukraine. I think so far Russia has obtained everything that she wanted. It's not only Ukraine, it's A2AD area that they're maintaining quite forcefully in the Black Sea. So I don't think Turkey is going to be put in the position of having to choose between NATO and Russia. And if it ever came to this position, I agree with Alisa, or at least with what I understand, or what I understood she said, being a member of NATO is of great importance to Turkey. So this would come before its transactional relation with Russia. But I don't think it will ever come, at least not around Ukraine. It won't come to this. And Turkey so far has been playing its role in Ukraine vis-a-vis Ukraine, given the Crimea issue, which is of importance for Turkey as well. Very, very well. It has managed to navigate between NATO and between Russia and between its own interests very, very nicely, I must say, without upsetting anybody too much. So I think this dance can well continue for a while. When it comes to European interest vis-a-vis Russia, you asked me, right? I thought you would ask me vis-a-vis Turkey. Well, it's very clear for now. European interests are yes, and they are based on continuing to receive gas on Russia, as cynical as it may sound. And it's less in the security field. It's even less in the security in the Black Sea field, unfortunately. Another interest when it comes vis-a-vis Russia should be, but it's not. It's getting a little bit of traction. It has been getting a little bit of traction recently. It's countering Russian anti-Western, anti-European propaganda, but this is going extremely slowly and extremely shyly, if you want, in the West. The main main interest remains gas, remains economic interest. This is why it's very complicated to aggregate a European policy and position vis-a-vis Russia, other than the sections on Crimea, which are still standing.
Thank you so much, Alina. Ambassador, I would like to have also your comments on this question, but I would like to put another question that's coming from Alper Coşkun. I'm reading the question. How can Turkey square the circle of calls within NATO led by Romania and Bulgaria and increasingly supported by US for an even more robust presence in Black Sea, given its national interest to sustain a non-confrontational relationship with Russia? Can Turkey do more showcase with NATO without running afoul of Russia?
Well, first of all, I salute my good friend and colleague Alper Coşkun, and I'm glad that he is with us at this discussion. And his question is something that more and more allies discuss within NATO. And we have seen the military adaptation of NATO since 2014. And as part of this adaptation process, there were also a number of measures decided by allies in the form of tailored enhanced presence for the Southeast, and also the presence of NATO in the maritime domain in Black Sea. There is a standing naval force, and we know that I think it was in 2015, the number of days that NATO was present in Black Sea was 45 days, and now it is around 120. So there's a substantial increase in terms of NATO's presence in the maritime domain in the Black Sea. Turkey, on its part, supports the additional visibility of NATO. I recall President Erdoğan in 2016, and later on reiterated his view that the Black Sea should not become a Russian lake. And he was complaining about the buildup of Russian forces after the annexation of Crimea. And we have to realize that Russia is using the Black Sea as a stepping stone for projecting its power to the Mediterranean. When I say Mediterranean, it is the south of Turkey and NATO, including Syria, stretching areas from Syria to Libya, with a view to having bridgeheads for its strategic ambitions. That's why it would be essential for NATO to keep an eye on the East, no question about it, but also the South. Now, while tackling Black Sea security issues, we should have a holistic approach. The conflicts that we see is land-centric. There are a number of protracted conflicts in the broader Black Sea region. So we should not only focus on the maritime domain, but have a holistic approach dealing with land, sea, and air components together. Another consideration that I could offer is that in line with NATO's policy, dual-track policy towards Russia, on the one hand, we need to strengthen NATO's deterrence and defense, and it will definitely include Black Sea region. So Turkey, in that sense, makes its own contributions, not only taking part in the standing naval forces, Astana format, but also in taking part in the early warning and reconnaissance flights by allocating its AWACS aircraft to Bulgaria and Romania. So it also shows solidarity with the countries in the region in that respect. Now, second consideration I could offer is that Black Sea is a very critical geography. Strengthening deterrence and defense is important, but in any case, these measures should not be provocative. This is the view of Turkey. Third consideration that I could share is the importance of the Montreux Convention. Montreux Convention has been faithfully implemented in spirit and letter by Turkey for so long. And it is a stabilizing element that we all need to accept. And implementing Montreux Convention is one of the prerequisites of NATO's successful implementation of strengthening deterrence and defense, but also maintaining a degree of stability in the region. And fourth consideration, which Turkey supports, and I already alluded to in the earlier segment of our discussion, is the need to support our littoral partners, Georgia and Ukraine, not only in their defense capacity building activities, but also keeping in mind the validity of open door policy of NATO to support them in their Euro-Atlantic aspirations. In 2008, in Bucharest summit meeting, NATO decided to admit Georgia and Ukraine as members to NATO when circumstances warrant, when the conditions are met. And we, as NATO, keep repeating this statement of 2008. And I believe that it would be important to intensify efforts for these countries to make necessary efforts in joining NATO as a full-fledged member. It is good for these countries, but also for NATO. One may say, well, what would be the reaction of Russia? And we have to admit that no country, including Russia, has a veto power. All the instruments, international instruments that Russia is a party to, including Helsinki Final Act of 1975, clearly states that any country is free to choose which military alliances to join or not to join. So it is a sovereign decision, and no other country, including Russia, should have a say in their free choices. If they really wish to join NATO, and we know that they do, then we should encourage them and support them in any way we can.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. Alina, I know that you have to leave in 5 minutes. Alina has another meeting. I would like to also have your comment on this specific question on the Black Sea. But before that, I would like to bring some other questions. You and then Alisa, you can also answer, of course. one from Ken Moriyasu says that Alisa talked about Turkey using Russia as a balancing element in the new multipolar world. What is Turkey's grand strategy in this multipolar world? Is there a future outside of NATO for Turkey? This was the first question. Another one, what, from anonymous attendee, what region can become a new point of diverging interest of Turkey and Russia? And another question, the third one, what can be said of the role of Iran in the Russian-Turkey relationship, both in the competition of regional influence and in their respective relations with the West? Arina.
Thank you. I'll be very brief as I have to run, and I apologize about this. Coming to the Black Sea, again, as I said before, and as the ambassador also mentioned, I think Turkey was very good at balancing between its role in NATO, and Turkey is a very loyal a member of NATO. It has been part of all the maritime exercises that took place in the Black Sea, which are increasing in both number and presence. It has been supportive of all of these exercises, while continuing to maintain a good relation with Russia. However, I do remember that Turkey has opposed some specific initiatives that were regarding the maritime space, which is the flotilla that Romania wanted Romania and Georgia, if I'm not mistaken, were the promoters of a few years ago. It's an idea that's still floating around, but I don't think it's getting too much ground. Turkey was opposed to this. So while it implements all of the initiatives and exercises and everything that comes through NATO, it is very reluctant to launch into new initiatives which are not necessarily fully embraced by NATO. And then the ambassador also mentioned that NATO has a strong presence in the Black Sea. Indeed, it does, and it does everything. Almost everything possible to deter Russia. And you mentioned maritime, you mentioned land, and you mentioned air. Yet, let's not forget that Russia is conducting a hybrid war. It's not only conducting a military war. And when the other aspects of this hybrid war of Russia come into play or into discussion, NATO is, and of course, Turkey as a member of NATO, NATO is not doing enough to address this, and I say this with some concern, basically. And very briefly, although it's not my field of expertise, but I think I just want to throw it here, and maybe Alisa can contradict me. I see at a potential geographical point of conflict, or at least of diverging interests for Russia and Turkey, Central Asia.
Thank you, Alina.
And sorry that I have to run.
Absolutely, thank you so much for joining. See you soon.
Bye. Thank you.
Over to you. Over to you, Alisa.
Sorry. Well, maybe I'll just pick up on that last point. I mean, I think, and I think there was a question on new potential areas of divergence between Russia and Turkey. I mean, when it comes to Central Asia at the moment, I would kind of turn the focus to Afghanistan. I think all eyes are on Afghanistan at the moment, and I think that's what Russia is most worried about when it comes to foreign policy interests in Central Asia, is any spillover of or any movement of Islamist extremists, or spillover of security concerns from Afghanistan on. And I don't think, and I'm not an expert on Afghanistan, but I don't see that Turkey and Russia have diverging interests there. So I think at least in the very near future, that their joint approach to handling the takeover of the Taliban there is what's going to be the overriding concern sort of in that area. And to some extent, some of the themes that we talked about already, there's perhaps there could be an interpretation that Russia might, be happy to see the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan, in the sense that, that they had their own complicated history in the area, but I think the security concerns are overarching, and so that's very quickly behind. I'm kind of, you'll have to remind me, Kadri, of the other issues.
This question about the Turkey's grand strategy in the multipolar world. And if there is do you see any future outside NATO for Turkey? This was one of the questions. If you want to comment, then Ambassador, you're welcome.
Well, I'm sure I would love to hear the ambassador's thoughts on this. I will reiterate that I think that NATO membership is extremely important to Turkey, and so despite the many op-eds and sort of analysis that has come with the impetus for this discussion, sort of concerns about the rapprochement between Russia and Turkey and the purchase of the S-400s, I still think that this remains a very important issue. So I don't personally, at least in the near future. I mean, so one of the issues we look at is also the East Med. I would say sort of Turkey's foreign policy has been more assertive in the region generally. Obviously, that includes in the last years its involvement in the conflicts that we discussed, but also in the East Med. And I think, on these issues, I'm sure there are different points of view, but I believe there's a bit of a de-escalation at the moment. There's a desire to or at least diplomatic overtures towards Egypt, towards other actors in the region. And I'm sure the ambassador can speak better to this, but I think that there is a desire to kind of balance the Western relationship against its own foreign policy goals in the region and its own sort of say in affairs, and the relationship with Russia helps that.
Thank you, Alisa. Ambassador, I would like to hear also your comments on this Turkey's grand strategy in the multipolar world, but I will, or Iranian role in the Russian-Turkey relationship. But I want to bring some other question. For that one is directed to you from Kurt Kaiser. Is there a role for Ukraine not more to be a breach between NATO and Russia? This is his question. Well, there is a question about the devaluation of Turkish currency. Probably I am the only economist here, but obviously, if we have the time a bit at the end, I will try to answer. But it's really not. I was sure that this question would be asked. He's also asking us, has it something to do about this Turkish currency? Has it something to do with its relation to the versus Russia? Okay, let's see this a bit later, maybe this question. Well, over to you, Ambassador. Then there are some please.
Since we are approaching to the end of the meeting, I will touch upon few points. Alina was talking about Black Sea Flotilla, the idea supported by Romania. I have to say that Turkey has supported feasible, affordable, and sustainable alliance, deterrence, and defense posture in the Black Sea. And we need also to recognize the developments that have taken place since the annexation of Crimea. That's why proposals that overlook the emergent post-Crimea military build-up in the region, and the example is creation of a Black Sea flotilla, had not been met with enthusiasm in Turkey. such a flotilla, if established, according to Turkey's opinion, would permanently remain in the crosshairs of Russian A2AD capability. And we know that not only for Black Sea, they have created this A2AD capability, but also help them to project power to the south. So I could only say that it is one idea coming from an allied country, Romania, but not something that Turkey has so far embraced wholeheartedly due to the reasons that I explained. Now, I cannot dwell upon grand strategy here in a limited time, but what I could say is that Turkey's relations with Russia and Turkey's membership in NATO should not be considered as things not reconciling with each other. Turkey is a loyal member of NATO, making invaluable contributions, and this is recognized by all allies. But at the same time, like other individual allies, Turkey also has bilateral engagement with Russia. And it is quite normal that a country like Turkey, sitting in close proximity geographically to Russia, and in finding the presence of Russia in many conflict areas, do feel it as a necessity to engage with Russia. And engagement is also part of the dual-track policy of NATO. On the one hand, strengthening deterrence and defense, but the other side of the coin is to maintain a periodic, meaningful dialogue with Russia. When the Russian fighter jet was downed in 2015, Turkey called allies for the convening of the North Atlantic Council meeting in line with Article 4 of the Washington Treaty, which talks about consultations among allies. And after that meeting, I recall the Secretary General not only talking about solidarity that allies voiced in this particular situation with Turkey, but also he expressed the expectation that Turkey would engage with Russia to de-escalate the situation. So engagement is key, and I hope that engagement that we talk about between Turkey and Russia could be valid in real sense between Turkey and its allies. Sometimes we see that there is lack of enthusiasm to engage with Turkey. When the AUKUS pact, the signing of AUKUS agreement between the United States, United Kingdom, and Australia happened, I remember there were reactions coming from France, and Secretary Blinken immediately went to Paris to engage with the French counterpart to explain things and discuss how to remedy the disappointments that the French side had. But I don't think that there is a similar kind of enthusiasm when it comes to certain difficulties between Turkey and the United States and within their bilateral relationship. So what I'm trying to say here is that keyword engagement should be employed more among allies, and consultations, coordination among allies, and using NATO more as a form of transatlantic dialogue and consultation will be featuring more, I'm sure, in the preparation of the new NATO strategic concept, especially complaints coming from different parts of the alliance regarding NATO's performance in Afghanistan and the decision to withdraw from Afghanistan.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. We have still 4 minutes left. I see still a question from Emiliano Alessandri. He's asking, what's President Erdogan's reading of US domestic politics? Is he betting on a Trump's comeback, or does he, in any case, believe that the age of strong, steady US transatlantic leadership is over and more autonomous Turkey is fully compatible with a less cohesive NATO and EU divided within itself? I would like to have a comment of you both. Please go ahead. Would like to comment on that. Go ahead, Ambassador.
I cannot speculate on how President Erdogan views engaging with the incumbent president and his expectations for the future. It will be pure speculation, which I will refrain from doing so. But in any case, Turkey and the United States are important allies within NATO. They have maintained very close ties historically. So there is a very strong foundation for these two countries to resolve some of the differences that they are having in their bilateral relations. Therefore, if both sides could be able to address some of the sensitive issues, like the acquisition of S-400s by Turkey from Russia, and the US support to PYD-YPG, which is with organic relations, ties with PKK, a terrorist organization recognized not only by Turkey but the United States as well. I'm sure that the environment in which they cooperate will be much different, and we would no longer be talking about whether Turkey would be having an autonomous policies rather than being a NATO member. And I don't think that this is a relevant point, because every country tries to safeguard its national interests, and there are different ways to do it. Yes, Turkey is a member of NATO and will remain so, but given the very fact that there are a number of conflicts around Turkey, and some of them relates to an existential threat of terrorism, then Turkey has the right to take necessary measures to defend these national interests, especially those that relate to existential threats for its own security. So being a NATO member would not diminish the importance of implementing policies that regional circumstances warrant.
Thank you, Ambassador.
And on Turkish lira's depreciation, all I can say is that I'm not an economist, so I cannot speculate on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Alisa, some words before we are closing?
Sure. I mean, I won't speak to the U.S. The view of U.S. domestic politics in a Trump comeback, but there's a lot of other things to unpack in that question. I think maybe it is important to say that both Russia and Turkey, to a certain extent, are acting in areas where they see a vacuum of either U.S. influence or EU presence, and you know, we spoke about some regions, but we didn't speak so much about the East Med or the Sahel or other areas where there is some great power competition, if we can call it that. I think also, you know, the U.S. relationship with Turkey, you know, it's important to note that the Biden administration, I think this was in the questions at some point, but the opportunity to reset that relationship may not be the priority for the Biden administration at the moment, which is focused on China and on Russia, with what we see going on in Ukraine at the moment. And similarly, there's a comment about the EU divided within itself. I mean, there are many differences of opinion within the EU, sort of a spectrum on how to relate to Turkey. As long as those both transatlantic and within the EU bloc differences exist, it does stymie any kind of response or policy to, at least what I look at, you know, Turkey and Russia's engagement in different conflict theaters in the world. But I'll just end on maybe a point, since the whole conversation has been about Russia and Turkey, and there is a tendency to kind of conflate the similarities between the two. I think one of the really important things, to come back to the comments that I made at the beginning, is to really see the differences there and the limits of that relationship, and a sort of a prioritization when it comes to policy. And it's not very helpful, I think, when there are policy discussions that kind of lump the two together and say, you know, we should respond in one way or another to something. So maybe on that very general comment, I will end.
Thank you, Alisa. And Mr. Ambassador, thank you so much, and Alina as well. She's not here anymore. Thank you so much, all three of you, for joining us and making this conversation work. It has been really terrific. Thank you so much. Let me thank also my colleague Anika and Alexandria, who helped to put all of this together. And above all, thanks all of you who have joined us. Thank you, and hope to see you again soon. Good afternoon.